Hi there, my name is Johnny Meatsack. Like you, I once held a normal life in a normal place with a normal job. I had a normal family. Hi, Karen. And simply thought I'd live my normal life to a normal death. One day, however, I experienced this thing called Gnosis. A direct revelation of a truer but distant reality, and the realization that my reality was a fabricated construct. I discovered my life was a lie and my identity was as synthetic as Alexa or Siri. And that the universe itself was a penitentiary built by cosmic overlords to trap and feed off my dormant, authentic consciousness. Jiminy crickets, I thought. My only choices were to join an awareness-killing cult like a political party or just kill myself. But by some luck or providence, Sophia's grace, I discovered Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio. Despite the host's creepy monologues and the show's blasphemous topics, I was able to develop the ability to uncover my authentic consciousness and deal with this prison planet. In other words, this gnosis grew until I was a fully divine being, no longer in the thrall of entities called archons and their soul-numbing, amnesia-causing powers. Thank you, Aeon Byte, for waking me up to my true eternal nature. Everything is still normal these days, except me, Johnny Meatsack. I'm on the adventure of many lifetimes to be completely liberated from the Black Iron Prison. Welcome, everybody, to Aeon Byte. Welcome to AB Live. I hope you're doing better than Johnny Meatsack, or at least reaching the heights that he has once he woke up. And so glad to see everybody on this Mercury day. This is actually my second live show today, and it's been exciting. Great show this morning on American Gnosis, and today will be truly a memorable show because our guest always brings down the Archon house. Yes, my name is Miguel Connor and is your Pompatus of Gnosis and often a Johnny Meatsack too. And with us, it's always a pleasure to have back Esoteric Eddie. Eduardo Cano, ¿cómo estás? Y un placer verte otra vez.
Hey, estoy bien. Gracias. Glad to be here. Glad to see y'all. Thank you for having me.
Definitely. It is truly mutual. And with us too, we've got the Moon Dog, the Vance Meatsack. How are you doing, Vance?
Rushing to the finish line. Finally got here on time, but barely. So a little rattled.
Sometimes it happens. Yeah, yep. Especially in this world. What are you going to do?
Live, you know.
It's not Memorex. Showing our age. My God, we show our age. Funny how these iconic, talk about the brainwashing, these iconic advertisements just stay in our head forever. Yeah. The stupid commercial jingles. Jesus Christ. Anyway, great to be here. It is great to be here as we deal with one of the big bad wolves of the esoterica, and that is Mr. Moloch. And Eddie's research is always right on, always very impartial, very scholarly, but he always goes to different, he covers different places, including occult and mystical arenas. So, what made you, have you been researching Moloch, or is he just part of your grab bag of Lucifer, Anunnaki, where you're always knee deep in, Eddie?
Oh yeah, man. I mean, I've been fascinated with the topic of Moloch since the beginning of my entire research journey. And actually, I don't know if you know this, but I've also been a music artist on and off throughout my life, and I've had a life as a hip hop artist. And my first rap name ever was actually MC Moloch when I was when I was in middle school.
Did you
Uh,
even know, or it just sounded cool back then?
I mean, I knew a little bit. Me and my friends were like starting to get into like researching and watching videos and stuff. And so I was just fascinated with like I don't know the idea of it. I thought it was crazy. I think I first heard about it through Alex Jones, and as a rapper and as a young person, you just try to be provocative. So I thought it would be a cool name.
Yeah, I think mine, I was young and back in the days of Stranger Things, the 80s, playing Dungeons and Dragons. And I had like the player's handbook, and we were playing. And then I turned on the TV, and some like fundamentalist preacher was going, "People who play Dungeons and Dragons are going to go to hell. Don't you see that's Moloch on the cover?" And I was like, "What? That's not in the book." I mean, of course, it was Moloch when you look back, when you start doing some research, but the game is about fighting evil things, right? Demogorgon, Moloch, all
Uh,
that stuff. So,
okay. Yeah, sorry,
but
my internet's lagging a little bit, so I don't know if it's showing on your side or not, but
I don't think so. If it continues, all you need to do is maybe turn off your camera and go dark. But it seems fine on my end.
Yeah, I don't see any
yeah,
problem.
okay.
All right,
But
well,
yeah,
let's jump into it. For those of you in the chat, as always, please super chat questions or complaints or whatever or any insults you want towards me. That's fine, and Vance will try to get to them as they're separate, or we will get to them. But again, it helps to be separated. Um, I think it should go well. Last week, the chat just devolved into the Chatico very fast. So hopefully today people will behave. There were some arguments today in the live interview, and I had to call some people out. But what are you going to do, right, Vince?
Yep, it happens. Depends on what's going on and who's trying to rattle our cage.
Who's on first? Who's on second? That's
Which
kind of thing.
archons are on duty that day,
Exactly, exactly. But there's always good conversations and good remarks. You guys there in the chat and in the audience, you know your stuff, and it's always great to learn from you. So, well, you want to get started, Eddie, or do you want to start with some flowery introduction, call to action, fight song, or should we just
I
get
don't think
started?
it's gonna be too long of a presentation, but definitely a lot of detailed information we'll go through. So I'm okay with getting started.
All right. Well, do your share screen, and I will throw
Mhm.
you up on the screen, and you can take over. You'll have complete control this time.
Yeah. You're not going to tell us he's a good guy, are you? Like he's sweet,
Maybe,
nice. We should all worship
maybe.
him and stuff. Send the kids up through his mouth and all that.
He works for
You never
Kaiser
know.
Soze.
Ugh. All right,
No,
sorry.
no, you're good. You're good. Yeah, it's definitely a twist, though. I mean, there's a lot. I found out a lot of interesting information as I usually do when I set off on these like research journeys. Let me see here. But yeah, as you were saying, or as you asked earlier, it's been a topic that I've been meaning to do for quite some time. And I knew that when I dove into it, when I decided to dive into it, that I was going to find out a lot of stuff that I didn't know before, as I usually do. But the stuff that I learned was fascinating, and I had no idea that it was going to lead to this conclusion, really.
Wow.
But can you see the PowerPoint there?
Yeah, let me put you on. Let me
Is
get
it?
you
Can you
live.
see it?
Right now, we're seeing, yeah, that now we see Moloch and Yahweh. There you go. You're moving it to the center.
Okay.
We got
All
it.
right.
We
All
can
right.
see it. I don't know.
Cool. And you
Yeah,
can stop. You
you're
you
in
have the power
control.
to stop it, right? If you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
Moloch and Yahweh, BFFs forever.
Hello. Hey Miguel,
All
can you
right.
hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, no, I was just wondering, do you have the power to stop the share and jump in if you wanted to, right?
Yeah, of course, of course.
Yeah,
Or
okay,
we'll
just want
just
to make sure.
interrupt you. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, so yeah, Moloch and Yahweh. That's the actual discussion here. And again, like most of my presentations, there is a video version of this that you can find on my channel at esotericeddie.com. Um, all right, so Moloch, right? So we've learned about Moloch primarily through the church and through the Bible, and so Moloch has been what's the word? He's been blamed, right, as being the god of child sacrifice. And we've been told by people like Alex Jones that the elite of our world sacrifice children still to this day to the god Moloch. And more
Hmm.
specifically, Alex Jones was made famous by exposing the Bohemian Grove ritual, in which he claimed that there was a ceremony surrounded by a a sacrifice to Moloch through the
Hmm.
burning of a fake body, or what they say was a fake body. Now, after this research, I realized that Alex Jones was sort of right worshiping Moloch. And if you watch the actual video of the Bohemian Grove ritual, which I have on my channel also, you'll find that they don't mention Moloch at all throughout the entire ceremony or ritual. And the statue that they're praying to and doing the ritual to is this huge statue of a an owl.
All right.
And so by definition, that statue wouldn't be Moloch either, because Moloch has always been deemed as like a bull, right? A bull statue, a bronze bull statue. And so by definition, they're not worshiping Moloch, but technically, as we'll find, they they were worshiping Moloch, as we'll see. And we'll get to that later. But so was Moloch real? Right? That's the question that I set out when I started this journey. Was what really is Moloch? Was he real? Was he really being worshipped? You know, what are the facts? And what I found is that there definitely was ancient human and child sacrifice. And we know this because there are several accounts of this that come to us from ancient sources, credible historians. One of those, I have four of those that we'll be briefly reviewing, coming from Clytarchus, Diodorus of Greece, Tertullian, who was an early church
Tertullian.
traveler, or 20th or 19th century traveler known as Robert Pashley. So I have four different sources that talk about this. And beginning with Clytarchus, we are told, and again, Clytarchus is from the 4th century BC. So this is the oldest account. It's not the oldest, but it's the oldest that I'm going to be covering. So Clytarchus said in one of his books, and I quote here, that there stands in their midst a bronze statue of Kronos, its hands extended over a bronze brazier, the flames of which engulf the child. When the flames fall upon the body, the limbs contract, and the open mouth seems almost to be laughing until the contracted body slips quietly into the brazier.
Ugh.
And this laughing was a thing that they called the sardonic laughter, and it became a term actually for some time in the ancient period. I guess when the babies would be burned, that their flesh would shrivel up and their mouths would create this weird gaping smile looking thing, kind of like the Joker or something. And it was called the sardonic smile. But yeah, that's coming from Clytarchus. And as we see, there definitely was a Moloch-esque type ritual happening here. But again, there is no mention of Moloch. This was happening in regard to Cronus. And Diodorus Siculus come seen, as we see here on the screen, pretty much saying the same thing. He says there was a city, and there was in their city a bronze statue of Cronus extending its hands, so on and so forth. The same exact thing coming to us a few hundred years later. And now Tertullian, who was one of the earliest Christian writers, also writes about child sacrifice, and this is coming to us from the 2nd century AD, or Common Era. And he writes in what is known as the Tertullian Apology that there was child sacrifice taking place in Africa, specifically North Africa, which was a precinct not belonging to indigenous Africans, but a precinct belonging to Phoenicians. Phoenicians who had traveled there through the empire expansion. And again, the child sacrifice that he explains had nothing to do with Moloch. He says that this sacrifice was being done to the god Saturn. And now Robert Pashley, he was a 19th century traveler, and he writes in his book Travels in Crete, and I quote here, the traditions respecting Talos would alone lead us to suppose that Crete once possessed as its chief deity a Moloch, horrid king, besmeared with blood of human sacrifice and parents' tears. And hundreds of years later, and by this point, we know who Moloch is. We understand the idea and the archetype in the Bible. So what he was referring to a Greek god known as Talos, who I also mentioned in the documentary that I made, but we won't cover that here. But Talos was another one of these strange deities that sacrifices were made to in ancient times, and he was also depicted as like a bronze type man or statue. But Robert Pasher here was making a correlation between Talos and the biblical Moloch. Now, get some water real quick. So the Bible and Gehenna. So Moloch, again, primarily comes from the Bible. And specifically, the worship of Moloch, as we're told in the Bible, comes from a very specific place in Jerusalem known as Gehenna. And Gehenna is actually this valley, as you see here in the background. It's this valley that in ancient times was used by these Moloch worshippers to set their babies on fire or whatever and do these strange rituals. And that valley, known as Gehenna by the Greeks, is known by the Jews as I'm blanking here. It's I think Gai Ben Hinnom. That's what it is. Gai Ben Hinnom, which means Valley of the Son of Hinnom, which was just translated as Gehenna later on by the Greeks. And this was a valley that once belonged to some guy named Hinnom, I guess, who sold it to his son, and we don't know anything about them. But in ancient times, people would come here, Canaanites, Phoenicians, early Israelites would come to this valley and worship Moloch. And this valley, actually, which is now a beautiful tourist site, ironically, is is what Jesus would refer to whenever he spoke of hell. And I have a whole nother video on my channel about this titled Hell Isn't Real, which breaks down the usage of the word hell and what Jesus was actually referring to. In the New Testament, whenever Jesus speaks about hell, he doesn't use the word hell. He uses the word Gehenna or Gai Ben Hinnom, which is this valley here. So he was using this valley as a reference to what life would be like for sinners in the afterlife. And again, that's a whole nother conversation, but it's pretty fascinating. Jesus actually obviously never spoke of hell. He spoke about this valley in reference. And he also never said that people would be punished forever. He said that people would be destroyed forever, like the children who were destroyed in the fires in Gehenna, who were worshiping Moloch here in Gehenna, would be put to death. So it was a very serious matter for Yahweh, for God. Now, again, so we have ancient evidence of ancient sacrifice taking place, human sacrifice, child sacrifice. But is there any evidence pointing to any of it at all being done in the name of Moloch? The Bible tells us that it was being done in the name of Moloch, and there was a strange bull deity or whatever, but we haven't found that evidence yet, or have we? Right? So what evidence do we have? In the 1920s, there was a French team who was doing some research, some archaeological research in different sites belonging to the kingdom of Carthage or the Phoenicians. And in one site, we found 20,000 what are known as tophets, or jars filled with the remains of children.
Oh,
So,
good God. Or
yeah.
bad God. Bad God. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Jeez.
Yeah, so beginning in the early 1920s, we've uncovered a lot of these ancient human sacrifice sites, now known as tophets. And in these tophets, in these ritual grave sites, we found jars full of bones belonging to babies and kids. And in total, as of right now, we've found 9 tophets, 3 in North Africa, which again belong to the 2 in Sicily, and 4 in Sardinia. So all of these are precincts of the Phoenician kingdom. And so all of this was being done by Phoenicians, or a branch of the Canaanites. And Caitlin De Benedetto, who is a researcher who I reference in my documentary, wrote an essay, a master thesis, I believe, essay for like the University of New York or something, titled "Analyzing Tophets: Did the Phoenicians Practice Child Sacrifice?" And in this essay, she goes over the data that was pulled from researching these tophets. And they were questioning, whether or not these ceremonial grave sites belong to ritual sacrifice, or whether they were just normal grave sites. What was the case?
Right.
And in order to find out if these bones, if these babies were ritually sacrificed, they had to examine the bones and see if there's any evidence of them being put up against really high heat, or put into really high heat. And so when they examined the bones and teeth belonging to these tophets, they found that 87% of these people, at least their bones and their dead bodies, were exposed to heat above 700 degrees Celsius.
Wow.
Probably super, super hot. And what they also found was that there was a lot of grave jewelry found, a lot of jewelry in these graves found among the tophets, which was evidence pointing to this being a ritual, right? There are people giving up jewelry along with these bodies. So it was some sort of ritual. It meant it was some sort of a meaningful event for them. But even more damning than that is we've found inscriptions within these tophets, inscriptions on a lot of these jars. And again, we don't find any mentions of Moloch, but we do find mentions of other strange gods. In one of the inscriptions, we read that the sacrifice was made to Sire Baal Haman, Lord of the Sky. I have dedicated Aris, son of Hannah, because you have heard my voice. And so these tophets, the conclusion of De Benedetto and a lot of other researchers is that these tophets were definitely ritual sacrifice sites where ancient people were willingly sacrificing their children to gods, strange Phoenician and Babylonian gods. Now, where this gets even more complex is the root word of Moloch. So Moloch of consonants, right? Because the Hebrew language, or the Hebrew
Right.
language, only deals with consonants. They don't have any vowels. And so the root word for Moloch is where a lot of the confusion comes from. The root word is MLK, Mulk, or Mulk.
Mhm.
And this root word can mean a lot of different things. It can mean Melech, Malik, or Milcom, just for example. And those are a few that we're going to be going over in this presentation. And Melech, Malik, and Milcom are all royal titles. For example, King of Kings, as we call Jesus, would be read in Hebrew as Melech, Malchai, Ha, and Malakim. All of those coming from the same root word that Moloch comes from. And this is also evident among other researchers, such as the work on Imperial and Other Titles by T.E. Colebrook, in which he talks about the famous Saladin who bore the title of Sultan as well as Malik. His full title, as it appeared on his coins, was the Malik, the Defender of the Faith. So so we've seen different usages of this root word mulk throughout different eras and different cultures in the ancient times. Now, the Bible primarily places Ammonites. The Ammonites are a strange people, and we're told in the Bible that they were descendants from an incestuous relationship between Lot, who is the nephew of Abraham, and Lot's daughter. So right off the
Yeah.
jump, they were pretty strange, to say the least.
Yeah. Well, that's still one of the best stories that Lot's daughters convinced him that the world had ended so they could sleep with him when they were in a cave. It's like you have to read it over and go like, what is going on here?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's probably why he started throwing them in the fire.
Yes, the bad girls you did.
Yeah. But yeah, so the Ammonites came out of that incestuous relationship, and there are some archaeological pieces of evidence for their actual existence. One of them being the Ammon citadel inscription, and in this inscription we find uh, a strange details having to do with the Ammonites constructing some building for their god Milcom, which again shares the same root word MLK as Moloch.
Mhm.
And we've also found among Ammonite sites seals of kings containing theophoric names to Milcom. Means may Milcom come. And again, so we find Milcom among the Ammonites, but no Moloch. There's no mention of Moloch. So the Bible again is gung ho or whatever of this Moloch character being real, but we haven't found any mentions of him among all this stuff. So why is that? It all has to do with this root word. And when we start to examine that root word, that's when it all starts to become a bit more clear and strange. All right. So what's even weirder is that although we know him as Moloch, he's not even called Moloch in the Old Testament. He's known as Molech in the Old Testament. Moloch is the Greek version or translation of Molech.
Mm.
And so there is actually no Moloch by name. It's Molech, if you want to be more specific, more accurate.
Right.
For example, in Leviticus 18:21, as we see on the screen, don't let your descendants pass through the fire to Molech. And there's a reason for this. Now, again, in ancient times, Melech meant king. And the Ammonites and the Israelites used that same word, Melech, to refer to their God. And so to the Ammonites. And so they playfully uh, changed the Ammonite word Melech, the Ammonite usage of the word Melech to Molech. And they use the same O pronunciation that they use for their word Boseth, which means shame. So the Hebrews, the writers of the Old Testament, again, as they have all throughout the book, playfully used or used some wordplay here. And so they were saying you don't have to the Ammonites. They were saying you don't have a Melech, you have a Molech, a shameful god, a shameful king, a shameful ruler. And to be honest, that's not something that I fully understand. It's something that you would only fully understand if you were Jewish, right? If you grew up in that cultural context, because the way they play with words, it's very cultural. It's very cultural specific. It's the same in any language. It's the same way in like English, how we have certain slang words that anybody else, even if they read the translation of it, they wouldn't really get it.
Yeah,
But
like if I call you bro and somebody reads it 100 years, it'd be like, oh, Eddie and Miguel are related, but that's not true, you know?
exactly, exactly. It's one of those things. So even the word Molech was just like this playful whatever. And so that kind of made things complex, even more complex than they already are. But getting back to the root word. So in Caitlin Benedetto's research and in the research done by those on the sites, we found that there were different types of references to this root word mulk. And she started to realize that this root word mulk, MLK, was not referring to a god, but was referring to a type of sacrifice. And among these 9 Tophets that we found at least 3 different categories for these mulks, for these ritual burnt offerings. And I have a quote from her paper on the screen in which I'll read. She realized that the first type of mulk was one known as mulk emor, which referred to the sacrifice of a lamb or a kid as a substitute for a child. The second is mulk baal, which referred to the sacrifice of a baal, the child of an estate owning or wealthy mercantile family. The final type not found at Carthage is mulk da'am or mulk adam, which refers to the sacrifice of a commoner. So among these tophets, among these jars that contained burnt up children, there were 3 different types of offerings. One of just a regular child, one of a substitute for a child, and one for a rich kid. And so we started to realize, or we started to realize that Moloch in real history, in real archaeological history, wasn't referring to a deity, but a type of sacrifice. And actually, one of the first people to realize this was a German scholar from the 20th century known as Otto Eisfeld. And he has an entire book on this subject. I don't have the name or the title on the screen, but it's in German. You can look it up if you type in Otto Eisfeld Moloch. But he wrote an entire book on this subject. He realized this as well. He realized this way back then. He started to look at all of this and realized that there was no real Moloch in history. That Moloch or Mulk, MLK, was referring to a type of sacrifice to several deities, several random deities throughout different cultures. And one of his reasonings for this came from what is known as the Nebi Yunus inscription. So the Nebi Yunus inscription, coming from the 3rd century BC, is a Phoenician inscription that also used the MLK root word in reference to to child sacrifice. And so basically saying that this idea of mulk, or people sacrificing children to mulk or a mulk or through a mulk, was not just specific to the Israelite culture, that this was something that was happening all throughout the ancient world. And so he started to realize there was something else going on here. It's bigger than the Bible, and it's not necessarily what the Bible is portraying it to be. And there was a lot of scholars that agreed with him, and many who didn't agree with him, because he also started to realize that the reason, that at least possibly one of the reasons why the writers of the Old Testament created this sort of archetype of a Moloch was to distance themselves from their very own usage of mulk offerings. He believed, as we'll see in this presentation, that the early Israelites were also practicing mulk offerings. And so they kind of created this Molech, this god, this archetype, to be a scapegoat and to kind of disassociate themselves from their very own Moloch sacrifices. And there's a reflection of this, or reflection of this in the book, in the biblical book Zephaniah. In Zephaniah 1:5b, we find this strange reference to Moloch, which might be a glimpse of a time when the early Israelites were also practicing ritual child sacrifice.
Mm.
In Zephaniah, at least verse 1, is about God's judgment on different types of people. And in Zephaniah 1b, God is judging people who, and I quote here, swear by the Lord and that swear by Malcolm. And for many, many decades, theologians have taken this to mean that God is condemning people who worship more than one God, who worship Yahweh, but also worship other gods.
Right.
But breaking this down by the Hebrew, we run into that root word again, MLK. And so it says, God condemns people who swear by the Lord and that swear by Moloch. And that Moloch was translated as Malcolm. But what Otto Eisfeld realized or postulated, as many other after him also postulated, was that maybe what they were saying was God was condemning people who swear by the Lord and that swear by the Lord by Moloch offerings.
Mm.
So God was condemning the worship of Yahweh, of himself, through child sacrifice, which insinuates that there was a time when the Israelites were doing that.
Talk about Malcolm in the middle, I'm sure.
Yeah, seriously. And so there's a lot of these strange little glimpses in the Bible of a time when the early Israelites were possibly performing Moloch offerings to Yahweh, to God. And one of the most blatant ones is the story of Abraham and Jacob. So we're told in Genesis 22:2 that God told Abraham, take now your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering.
Yeah, that's very true.
So even right there at the beginning of it all, Yahweh, God, was okay with this, was okay with us burning our children. And I don't say that to, condescend on the Bible or whatever. I say that so that we can realize and understand that this was normal, right? That this was normal in that ancient time, as is evident in all the stuff that we just covered, right? The ancient people of the Levant, of those lands, were okay with child sacrifice. It was normal to them. It was normal to them to offer up their children in burnt sacrifice to the gods. So the writers of the Old Testament were simply continuing the culture they grew up in, the culture that they were surrounded in, and it's reflected in these little stories like that of Abraham and Jacob.
Yeah, and even then, I mean, that's not the only. There's other types of human sacrifice. There's that you find Joshua. He's fighting somebody, sacrifices some people. Is either David or Saul brings the king of some. He defeats some army, brings the king, and Samuel chops him up and sacrifices him. Of course, you've got Jephthah's daughter, who is forced to. He's forced to sacrifice his daughter to Yahweh. So.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And so
This stuff
it
was
might.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
The question people might say is why do babies? The gods just like the taste of little babies, like Fat Bastard in the movie? What's his name? I already forgot. Austin Powers,
Austin,
or
of
was
course,
it the
yeah.
souls better? I mean, do we know? Or I know there's many
there is
theories like blood kind of just fuels the universe, and if the blood has to come back and up and down that the gods give us, but why burnt sacrifices and babies?
Yeah, there is a conclusion that I present towards the end.
Oh,
But
okay, then whenever
honestly,
you're ready.
yeah, but my honest opinion is I think we're just crazy, like as humans, we're just nuts, and we do the weirdest things.
We were made in
And
Yahweh's image.
yeah, seriously. I mean, that's my honest answer. I think we just do the weirdest things. We're very superstitious in nature, like
Somebody said
I
adrenochrome. You got to put that there.
yeah, I mean, obviously there's that whole thing, right? And that's where it stems from. It's like, and that's the main argument for that is like the elite of today are still like worshiping Moloch through the harvesting of adrenochrome or whatever.
Mhm.
Maybe. And to be honest, I didn't add in any of that in here because there's not any real information I can find on that out there. It's just all speculation. But it is crazy though. Like if we really stop and think about it, it is really crazy that our human ancestors were just throwing their babies into these like bronze statues of different gods in hopes of some sort of prosperity. I mean, it's just nuts. Whoever taught them that is crazy. And I think that's what we should be asking ourselves is who taught them that? And to be honest, it's not something that I really get into in this presentation or the documentary. But just for fun, I mean, when we look at our ancient past and we ask ourselves, well, who taught us anything to begin
Mm,
with? We're told by the Sumerians that we were taught everything we know by the Anunnaki, by the
mhm,
gods.
right.
And so, whoever these Anunnaki people were, whoever these gods were at the beginning of our modern timeline 7,000 years ago, they taught us this. And it might have been some weird sadistic form of population control,
Yeah.
because even in the Sumerian epic of the flood, when Enlil decides to flood mankind, he does so because he's annoyed of us. He's literally just annoyed of us and realizes that we are what's the word reproducing too quickly. Actually, that's the reason why. Well, in the Sumerian in the Sumerian text, we're told that we humans were making too much noise. That's what it says. We were making too much noise, and it angered the god Enlil. But some scholars have taken that to mean that we were reproducing a lot,
Yeah.
making
Well,
that
the
making that kind of
Odyssey,
noise.
most people think the Odyssey is about Ellen of Troy falling in love with Paris, whatever, but it's basically Zeus manufactured all because the world was becoming overpopulated and he needed to do a little eugenics. So he did this Trojan War so that that area of the world would just exterminate itself. So I think you're on into something. We see that over and over again. And it's good that not all humans bought into this demonic stuff. I mean, the Romans hated Carthage, and one of the reasons because the Romans hated child sacrifice, and you see that Zoroaster banned all forms of sacrifice. He thought in 400 or 500 feet, where we came 500 BC. We don't know that this was evil, and of course, Christianity, as many have said, say what you want, but they said no, one sacrifice, no more sacrifice, because even in the times of Jesus, other cultures were just yeah, feeding
Yeah,
souls to the gods, and with Jesus is like one-time deal, everybody's fine. So
yeah,
There may have even
yeah.
been a time when during famines where people did that, not only to try to get, the fertility back up, but because they couldn't feed the children.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, we see that in the farm life. I live on a mini farm and that's pretty common too, and I mean even the mothers themselves would do that in nature when they know
sure.
that they can't take care of all the children, they'll just leave one astray or whatever.
But I think you can breastfeed a child solely 1 or 2 years. I mean, you don't have to just let's throw them in the fire.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah, that was that little extreme.
No, I think there's something perverse, some sort of deal with the devil. I think with bad
Yeah,
aliens.
man.
Yeah, but
Yeah, Yeah, man. So again, right? The Bible was like the main source for this whole Moloch myth, if you will, this whole Moloch archetype. But in real archaeological history, we have found a lot of evidence for crazy ritual human and child sacrifice, but none of it was being done in the name of Moloch. It was all being done in the name of various gods. But
Right.
the root word for Moloch was and being found among these sacrifices. But we now know that this root word for Moloch wasn't referring to a deity, but a type of offering. And that changes the whole narrative again, because now we start to look at these different mentionings in the Old Testament and these different glimpses and reflections in the Old Testament to Molech sacrifices as insinuating that the early Israelites were also partaking in this as well. And that's kind of why they wanted to create this archetype to disassociate themselves from that. At least that's one explanation.
So the good news is there is no Moloch. The bad news is that he's every god.
Yeah, pretty much. But again, so this was common in the ancient world, right? And this was
Right.
common, and this is why it was so easy for God to say to Abraham, you know, burn your child, and that's why it was so easy for Abraham to be like, okay, sure, because
I'll
the
do
early right, because the early Israelites were basically a branch of Canaanites, and
that.
this is a topic that I've covered in my past books and other documentaries, and there's a lot of amazing other documentaries and books on this very same subject. So I'm not going to cover it too deep, but it's obvious to me, as it is to many other scholars and researchers, that the early Israelites were just were just a branch of the Canaanites, and so they were carrying a lot of these polytheistic Anunnaki type rituals and traditions. And that's why pretty much the whole entire early part of the Old Testament is God and Moses trying to get them to stop doing that. Yo, like, stop doing this. Like, we're moving towards a whole different plan over here. And one piece of evidence for the Israelites being a branch of Canaanites comes from Exodus. In Exodus 6:2, God says to Moses, I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob as El Shaddai, God Almighty, but I did not reveal my name Yahweh to them. And of course, El Shaddai being a rendition of the Canaanite god El. And El was the father of all the gods, the father of all the Canaanite gods.
Right.
And so it's obvious that this Judaism thing, this monotheism thing, was a new thing that was being formulated out of that old polytheistic Anunnaki world. Now,
Makes
El.
perfect sense.
So El has a huge role to play in this whole Moloch confusion as well. And actually, I believe that if there was a Moloch, it was probably El, which makes things even weirder.
Oh wow.
So again, we're told by the Bible that the Ammonites were the primary worshippers of Moloch. And actually, King Solomon eventually started worshiping Moloch, and that was a part of his downfall because he befriended the Ammonites. And I think that he like married an Ammonite daughter or something. And so for a while, the Ammonites and the Jews were one kingdom, or they were you know,
Right.
neighbors. But the Ammonites, as we learned, never worshipped Moloch in real archaeological history. They only worshiped Milcom. But we've learned that Milcom was just a title for their god El. There was no Milcom. They were just using that as a title for their god El. And this is evident in the fact that although we found some seals that have theophoric names to Milcom, we found so many more seals and references for the god El. So scholars believe that Milcom was just a title for their god El. And what's strange is that El has always been known as the bull of heaven.
Mhm.
And so this might be where this whole bull imagery began, right? Because we're told that Moloch was worshipped as this bull, a statue of a bull-like deity. And it's interesting how El has always been known as the bull of heaven. And this is known, for example, in an Ugaritic text known as KTU 1.12, which is up on the screen. It says, straight away turn ye your faces at the feet of El unto the bull, my father El. And strange enough, Yahweh has also been mentioned as the bull of Jacob, for example, in Genesis 49:25. And so if we understand that the early Israelites, again, were a branch of Canaanites who were basically continuing the mythologies, continuing the traditions, but beginning to change them into a more specific form, which would later become Judaism, we can now see how it is that they borrowed and copied a lot of this stuff. And we can also see how and understand how El simply became Yahweh through the new Judaic traditions and the new Judaic philosophies and mythologies. So in other words, Yahweh and El are one and the same, technically. You know, mythologically speaking, religiously speaking, they're two different things. But technically, they were formulated out of the very same thing, the very same people, the same traditions. And that's why El is known as the bull of heaven, and that's why Yahweh is known as the bull of Jacob. They're one and the same person, one and the same God, just different perspectives, different spins. But even crazier than this is, of course, all of this Abrahamic mythological stuff and all of this Canaanite mythological stuff comes from the ancient Mesopotamian mythologies having to do with the Anunnaki.
Right.
And Enlil, right, the god Enlil, who's always been like this father figure as well, was also known as the bull of heaven. For example, in a text known as the debate between winter and summer, we are told, and I quote, Enlil set his foot upon the earth like a great bull. Enlil, the king of all lands. And so to answer earlier as to why were they burning their kids? Why were they doing this? Well, there's a scholar who I mentioned in the documentary version of this, known as John D. Levinson, who is a prolific Hebrew and biblical scholar, studied this and came to the conclusion that the reason the ancients were doing this is because they were reenacting the story of their god El and his son Baal. So apparently, in a lot of the ancient Canaanite tales of El, there are instances in which El sacrifices his son Baal in different ways. It's like a weird like cartoon thing of like Tom and Jerry or something. Yeah, or like El just continually sacrifices his son.
Or
But
like Kenny
apparently,
from South Park, he just keeps coming back to life every the next episode.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's exactly what happens. So a lot of these stories, in some weird miraculous way, Baal comes back to life, and then El rejoices with him and says, "Sorry, son, I didn't mean to do that to you." And so that's Levinson's conclusion. He believes the reason that these ancient people were doing this was because they were reenacting these stories.
Mm,
I mean, geez, it didn't have to be a real fire, like could have just been a
yeah.
play or something.
Well, they took it seriously, as above, so below, correspondence. They felt, yeah, everything had to mirror each other harmoniously, or the very universe might fall apart. So they were very serious about this stuff. They were very
Exactly.
active and connected to the gods. Like everybody had to play their role and do their thing in the grand theater.
Yeah. Oh yeah, man. The world's a stage.
Yeah, yeah. It's just one big story.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So in my perspective, I think that again, if there ever was a Moloch, it all comes back to El, and furthermore to Enlil and the Anunnaki gods. Because let's pause here for a second, right? We have the Old Testament writers telling us that the ancient people their adversaries, who are basically the old world that they were trying to disassociate with, were worshiping these bull statues and burning their children to these bull statues. We've never found any mentions of Moloch. We've never found these bull statues, but what we have found throughout ancient Mesopotamia are those bull statues in Iraq. I don't have any pictures of it online pulled up right
Oh,
now, but I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about, right? We've seen in Iraq, we've seen in Iraq and in ancient Mesopotamia these statues, right, of the, I think they're called, I forgot what they're called, but of those bull-headed or those man-headed bull statues. Do you know what I'm
right, right.
talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, so in real archaeological history, we have found statues of bull-like deities, and it's all these like strange, weird statues that come out of Iraq, Sumer, and Babylon, and stuff like that. And all these strange bull-like statues were references to the Anunnaki, to Enki, to Enlil, to Anu, who are also known as the bulls of heaven. And so maybe the Bible was in a weird way telling us that these people were sacrificing their children to the Babylonian and Sumerian Anunnaki gods, because that's the closest thing in history that we can actually piece together with all the evidence. And
Makes perfect sense. Yeah.
yeah, and I've always said in my other books and my work is that the story of the Anunnaki is in the Bible. It's right there, but you have to read between the lines. And it is obvious that it would be right there because the people who wrote the Old Testament were again coming out of that world. They were coming out of that. So their ancestors were the Sumerians, were the people who worshiped the Anunnaki. So they understood that way more than we could. That was their world. That was their history, as it is ours. But we just have such a severed, tie to it, a severed connection to it, emotionally, contextually, historically, all of that. And
How
so
about
again, this.
how about
Go ahead.
Mithras? How about Mithras and all that stuff? You got something for us in there? Tie all this into that?
No, I didn't find any connections along my journey to Mithras, but it is interesting how Mithras is kind of the reverse, right? He sacrifices the
He
bull.
kills the bull. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's something to that. I don't cover it in this presentation, but in the documentary version, I cover a few other mythologies having to do with the bull. For example, again, going back to Talos, the Greek god, he wasn't depicted as a bull, but he was depicted as a bronze man in which people were sacrificed to. But then we also have the Minotaur, right? The Greek Minotaur,
Oh yeah.
um, who children were sacrificed to, people were sacrificed to. And what's
Right.
interesting is that the mythology, the story of the Minotaur is that the people were sacrificed to him in payment for their killing of King Minos's son, I believe. And King Minos was the son of a Phoenician queen or something like that. So King Minos, the Minotaur, and all that was connected to the Phoenicians, the Phoenician royalty. So it's interesting how again these Phoenicians, these Canaanites, are tied to a bull god in which humans, specifically children, were sacrificed to. And there's another piece of evidence that I cover in the video having to do with a artifact known as the Pozo Moro statue. So there's a statue thing that we found in Pozo Moro, Spain, that has this strange depiction of a sacrifice happening, and in that depiction we find again this like bull deity. There's this bull deity in this depiction. There's no writing or anything. There's just this imagery of these kids being sacrificed to this bull god. And so we found that strange statue in Pozo Moro, Spain, but there's nothing else like really around it or anything. The only thing that is interesting about it that can connect it to all of this is that it was found in an area that at once was occupied by Phoenicians.
Mm.
And so again, it kind of all comes back to the Phoenicians and who they were and all of that. And again, they were a branch coming out of the old Anunnaki worship. They pretty much were the first. The Canaanites in general were the first to kind of like take the Anunnaki mythology and then flip it into their own thing, which the later Greeks and Romans and Jews did as well. But the Phoenician and Canaanite part of it, that part of history, was very influential in the rest of the Abrahamic and even pagan mythological development. But the development of the Phoenician Canaanite mythologies came from the Sumerian. And so that's the piece that like pretty much is the bedrock of all of it. So yeah, so this bull god, right? So in my thought, this bull god was none other than El, was none other than Enlil, the Anunnaki that people were throwing their children into fire for. But what makes it all crazy, right, is that the Bible itself gives us glimpses that insinuate that the Israelites, the early Israelites at least, were also partaking in this form of worship, which was known as a Moloch, which again, a Moloch was not a deity, but a type of offering that the ancient world was performing. And what's pretty wild is that, again, as I covered, Abraham was about to perform a Moloch for Yahweh because Yahweh commanded it. But what's even crazier is that Yahweh himself, in essence, performed a Moloch sacrifice in front of the entire world when he sacrificed his one and only begotten son, Jesus Christ. And so, again, that was very common to him, very common to the ancient world, to sacrifice your children for the greater good.
Maybe there's no escape, even with the gods.
Yeah, and so that's what I meant when I started this presentation by saying that Alex Jones was right, but also wrong. He was right, or he was wrong in saying that the people at Bohemian Grove were worshiping Moloch and sacrificing to Moloch because there was no mention of Moloch throughout the ritual. There was no statue of Moloch, but he was right because now we know that there never was a Moloch, that Moloch was actually a type of offering. So these people at Bohemian Grove, by technicality, are and were performing a Moloch sacrifice, a Moloch sacrifice. But
makes sense. Yeah, Alex. Yeah, there's no Moloch, but yeah, go when you open the Bible you love so much, you'll see that Moloch there. A lot of Molochs.
yeah, man. But that's pretty much it. That is the grand discovery of
That was
Moloch.
excellent. That was
Good work.
truly excellent. Yeah, disturbing, but definitely eye-opening and yeah, fascinating. And I'm glad the truth is out. I mean, we can judge all we want, but that's not going to make a difference. We got our own stuff to deal with, and we allow a lot of horrible things to happen in our society. But I'm glad we got out of that age of the bull into the age of Aries, where animal sacrifice became more common, into the age of Aquarius, where Pisces, where things are, a little bit better when it comes to the bloodshed.
And we're sacrificing the air now with smog and pollution.
Yeah, Aquarius. Yeah, we're just gonna
right.
the whole planet. Yeah, that was really good. I have a few questions, but maybe Vance, you or the Chatico, or I see a lot of great puns as I'm looking there. Like,
yeah,
I got a pair of brass balls or stuff. Really funny puns that the chat has. So.
All sorts of. I haven't seen that. Oh, there is one. There was one thing. It's not a question, but Sarastic Warlock wanted you to check out this book called Golem, unless you already have it, by Moshe Idel.
I'm gonna write that down right now.
Yeah, he says you'll dig it. A wild picture of history. Sounds just like something that you'd enjoy.
Okay.
Thank
you for that.
Super chat.
Yeah. Thanks. Yes. Sarcastic Warlock. And Chester gave us one too.
I see.
And
thank you so much.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
I know we're doing it.
I know.
We did it.
Yeah, last
Infinitum
time.
Neo. Thank you very much. Yeah, Eddie's always good research. And it's interesting too because I know of some. I love your work, Eddie, but I also love Dan McClellan's work. I follow both of you, and I learned so much. And I know you made it to one of his. Oh, all right, let's see it. He called you out on something, but he didn't call you out on the Moloch thing. It was what the Anunnaki thing that he called you out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was fun. That was fun to watch. And I honestly, I don't get offended. I think it's cool. It's good for us to challenge each other.
Yeah.
But yeah, he called me out on one of the Anunnaki things, and actually, two people have called me out on that thing. One was him, and then another guy who's pretty big as well that does
Oh,
similar work as him, known as Inspiring Philosophy. Do you know that
no,
guy?
I'm not familiar with him now.
Yeah, he's like the same as like McClellan, does same work, same
Oh,
stuff.
okay.
And they both called me out on that same clip where I talk about the Elohim. I talk about how the Elohim in Genesis are the Anunnaki, and they use pretty much the same argument. They're like, "Oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. That the Elohim is plural in Genesis because that's referring to the divine council." And I thought that was a funny response because that basically validates what I'm saying. Because the true theologian, the true Christian theologian would try to argue that the plurality in Elohim is mistaken, and that the
Mhm.
plurality of Elohim in Genesis when man is being created is actually just God talking to Jesus or God talking to the angels. But the
Right.
fact that they used the divine council as a response, I thought was funny because the idea of the divine council all comes from the Canaanite mythologies. The divine council
Yeah.
is a specific Canaanite polytheistic mythological tradition. And so they were just validating what I was saying, which was that the Elohim in Genesis is plural because it's coming out of the polytheistic Canaanite worldview, which eventually leads back to the Anunnaki.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, you have to. It's hard to argue that the Sumerians didn't influence all these religions. And again, of course, the Jews ended up in Babylon, and there was a lot. The Babylonian religion was still very influenced by the Sumerians. Obviously, Zoroastrianism and other were there, but Marduk was big in Babylon, and some of these old gods. So it would have influenced them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a big game of telephone. I just put that in the chat, like it starts out, let's say the Sumerians, and then the message mutates and names of the god mutate, and then it gets translated into another language and that changes it. And I think what you presented tonight is a good example of that, the way things, the filling in the different vowels because, Hebrew didn't have vowels. So, it's just like things get distorted, there's a signal to noise thing going on.
Yeah.
Got another super chat from Sarcastic Warlock, in which he just wants to tell you he spent $5 to tell you
Thank you.
to check out Atlantis, Edda, and Bible by Herman Wieland from 1924.
Writing that down right now. Atlantis, Edda, and Bible.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Sarcastic.
Well, here's a
Ooh.
question I have for you, Eddie. When in Judaism or with the Hebrews, when did child sacrifice or just sacrifice in general go out the door?
I believe
Was it the
after
Greeks or who forced them? Usually it's an outside force.
yeah, I don't know the time in actual history, but I know in the biblical story it ended I believe with the downfall of King Solomon because he
Oh,
was the
wow.
one who
That caught
actually
on.
yeah, because he actually instituted it like into the kingdom, which was pretty wild. Like he actually allowed it to happen like within the kingdom, like the actual like
Does it say that in the
royal
Hebrew
kingdom.
Bible? Does he say he allowed sacrifice, or are you just talking about the gods? Because he was very polytheistic. That's what most people don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, I don't know. I have to brush up on that part, but I know for sure that he was worshiping Moloch, and if he was worshiping Moloch, then I'm sure he was doing it the same way all of them were doing it, unfortunately.
Yeah. So then David, afterwards, it sort of goes out, and by the time, obviously, Jesus would be horrified. Most Jews would have been horrified in those days about something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and that's probably why Jesus used Gehenna as like such like such a
You know?
vile reference for the afterlife that would be for sinners.
And you've seen, obviously, those beyond Alex Jones, there's that statue in the Vatican that's pretty scary that everybody thinks it's Moloch. Have you seen that? That's
Yeah,
another
so
fun conspiracy theory, yeah.
yeah, weird like golden one where it's like supposed to be Jesus coming out of hell or something.
It's this monster on top of this throne or something, yeah.
Just looks like somebody spilt like chocolate milk or something, just like threw it
Yeah,
on
in
the
the
wall.
air.
Oh, is this
Yeah,
that
yeah.
picture they have where the Pope's sitting there and there's this huge thing in back of him? It looks like,
That's
yeah,
fun.
yeah. It's not really that big though, isn't it? They just blew it up to make it look like a huge backdrop, like in, yeah.
Really? I didn't know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, but again, it's not Moloch, right? It's like we use a lot of these terms like Moloch, Baphomet, Illuminati, which are all things that I've deconstructed and shown the true history of, but we use a lot of that stuff like to just explain things away in generalities. But it's not Moloch, it's something weirder than that.
Well,
Yeah.
there might be something to this. The sound of a particular name in a language carries its own energy, and Moloch, it just sounds like horrible. It sounds like something abominable. L sounds, oh, L, it's like an elf.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Baphomet, I always say splish splash, I'm taking a Baphomet.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're right. That's exactly why the Israelites created the word Molech, because as I was saying, they did that playfully to the Ammonites. They're saying you don't have a Melech, you have a Molech, right? Like a shameful god.
Mhm.
Which brings up the other subject, and I bet you know about this, vowel sounds. They're, the legends of angelic languages that are strictly vowel sounds, and the,
Mm,
the vowel sounds have different energies. It's interesting that Hebrew didn't have vowels, and you had to put the vowels in when you spoke it, and that's kind of an interesting scenario there, because you could take a
yeah,
word and make it have different kinds of energies by adding the different vowels in.
yeah. No, I haven't heard too much about that, but now that you say it, it is kind of like the Hebrew script was meant to be kind of like a code, right? And then if you had the right vowels to plug into the words, it would change the context. It change the
Mhm.
context of what's being said.
Yeah. Like Yahweh didn't have any vowels in it, YHVH or whatever that translates into Hebrew lettering. Um, and maybe that's why you can't pronounce his name, because you don't know what the vowels are.
Yeah. Yeah, we should just try all of them. Just like I don't know what the combination would be, but we should just go on a what are those things they used to do where like they stayed on TV for hours and hours on end? Those things. We should just do one of those. And
Test
let's
pattern.
figure out. Yeah, I don't know when they would like fundraise. They fundraise
Oh,
on TV.
telethons. Yeah,
Yeah,
telethons.
we should do a telethon. Just, let's
Jerry
try
Lewis.
every vowel combination until God comes down and strikes us. Yeah.
Interesting.
Or maybe he's like, was that villain that Superman had to fight, this wizard, and he had to get him to say his name backwards, Mister
Oh,
whatever.
Mr. Mixiplict. All right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was it. The only way Superman could defeat him was by having him say his name backwards because he was from another dimension and he was invulnerable. So maybe
Mm.
that's it. Maybe Yahweh wants us to trick him into saying his name backwards or something.
Like
Who knows?
Rumpelstiltskin, right?
That's another
Yeah.
one. That's another one. Yeah,
Although
the true
Mr.
names.
Mixiplict, he had Y, the letter Y in his name. So in theory, that was kind of a vowel. Y is a kind of a unofficial vowel, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
honorary vowel.
Very, yeah, an honor. Well, awesome. Well, this has been really eye-opening and exciting. And you have the documentary version on your channel right now, or are you working on
Oh yeah, no, it's already out. You can go watch it.
it?
Yeah.
Okay, and I'll have it on the show notes. But for those who are listening in audio here or when I put out the audio version, where do you want them to go to find out more? Your YouTube channel or where else?
Yeah, you can find all my videos on YouTube at Esoteric Eddie TV. You can follow me on Instagram where I also post a lot of random content, serious, some not so
Yeah, I
serious.
noticed.
Yeah, at Esoteric Eddie. I am a person too, all right? Not
You
always
have a
not
lot.
always this serious.
Well, you have to
But
have a
yeah.
sense of humor. This stuff really could depress you, right? Drive you
Oh
crazy.
yeah, man. Seriously. But you can also find merch and like my books and stuff and blogs at my website at esotericeddie.com.
Yeah, and all his books are excellent on the Anunnaki, on Lucifer. Yeah, just get his books. I have his books, and they'll always have a good place when I need to, do some research about the ancient times and the shenanigans of the gods and all these other cray beings back then. Not that we're much better looking at the state of our planet, but you know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, man.
well, again, I think that's it. Unless somebody has one last question. Again, glad the chat was not the Chatico tonight.
Yeah, they're
Everybody was
great.
having a good time, and everybody had some great puns. So bless you, bless you. What was I going to say? Yeah, next week we will have David Block. He's going to give us, again, we'll go left-hand path to some dark gods the day after Thanksgiving, because if you're going to be a Gnostic, get into that weird stuff right after Thanksgiving. Should be fun, and this show, of course, will be out on Rockfin Audio and all other podcasters by tomorrow. The only thing I wanted to say, I did want to dedicate this show. Have you guys noticed there's usually a black cat there? His name was Ringo, named him after the Beatles. Cat for 15 years, slept on my feet for 15 years, was always around me. He didn't come for his food. He always had two favorite places: sleep by my feet, or he had a place outside in the porch, underneath the porch, where he would watch animals and cars go by. So of course I knew what had happened. Went out this afternoon, and he had decided to transform to the other world, and that's how cats are. 15 years old, they decide they've had enough. They're going to the spirit world, and they go somewhere where they like, and they just give up the ghost. So I dug a hole right there where he loved watching, and I dug up the hole, and there he is now. So I'd like to dedicate this show to Ringo. I know some of you may say, well, it's a cat, but there's suddenly a void, an energy form, an aura, a spirit that was in my life is no longer there. And I'd like to honor Ringo, and I'd like to tell you, please be grateful for your animals, for your friends, for your children, for anything, because it goes by quickly, and
Yeah,
those voids cannot be replaced in Indra's net. Death is an illusion. He's with the greatest source. We all go back to the source. We all see each other and our loved ones in time, beyond time, because linear time is a complete lie, but our egos fools us. So wanted to dedicate this show to Ringo. Miss him a lot, and it's going to be a long night for me. But that's it. I thank you for everybody for being here. Eddie, thank you so much as always. You rock, man.
yeah, Eddie.
Muchas
Thank you.
gracias.
Thank you. Good to see y'all.
Fantastic.
And Vance, thank you very much for taking care of the Chatico.
Okay, nothing to do tonight, Miguel, and my condolences for Ringo. May he rest with the Aeons.
Thank you. He's fine. Again, death is an illusion. We just need to change our perspective. But
Yep.
still stings. It still stings down here in the
So
meat
we
sack.
still feel the loss.
Yeah. So, and the kids is hard. First time the kids have experienced. Oh, they're old enough to understand death. Their first pet dying, so they're all over. They're all over the place. So, but such it is. All right. Well, everybody's again. It's a joyful thing. Remembering people, keeping them alive, keeping our animals alive is a joyous thing. It's a celebration. Life should be a celebration. Children should be a celebration, and they should not die. Sacrifice in wars of hunger out in the streets. So let's go anti-Moloch. And for everybody, please enjoy the rest of your Mercury day. And as I always say, write your own gospel, live your own myth. Take care, everybody.
Bye.